The world stage has seen a flurry of significant events lately, impacting economies and political landscapes globally. From shifting alliances to economic fluctuations, staying informed is more crucial than ever. Today, we delve into a fascinating hypothetical scenario rooted in some very real connections. What if I posed the idea that 6 United States, yes, actual American states, could potentially pivot and align themselves with Canada, almost in the blink of an eye? Imagine a situation where border lines are redrawn, flags are exchanged, and passports need reissuing, all triggered by a single pivotal event, not through conflict or dramatic upheaval. It might sound far-fetched, perhaps even absurd. However, the states we're about to discuss already exhibit more Canadian characteristics than you might initially assume. These connections span cultural norms, economic interdependencies, and even political alignments. All that might be required is one specific tipping point to initiate such a monumental shift. And believe me, the final state on our list presents a case that could truly challenge your perspective. Stay with us as we explore these intriguing possibilities, and remember, we'll be summarizing the key takeaways and conclusions at the end of the video. If you find this exploration insightful, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Your support is incredibly important for helping us bring you more content like this. Also, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love hearing from our audience around the globe. Let's begin with number 6. Oregon. Consider this. What if a state, seemingly deeply woven into the American identity, suddenly contemplated that its future might be brighter north of the 49th parallel? Oregon, often perceived as a quintessential West Coast state, reveals a different story upon closer inspection. Its ties to Canada are already remarkably strong, almost as if they're joined at the hip. This isn't just a superficial similarity. It runs deep through various facets of life. From its progressive political stance to its environmental regulations, Oregon shares significant common ground with its northern neighbor, particularly British Columbia. In many respects, its policies and values resonate more closely with Vancouver than with some of its southern U.S. counterparts. The economic relationship further solidifies this connection. Annually, trade valued at over $4 billion flows between Oregon and Canada. This isn't merely a friendly exchange. It represents a vital economic lifeline for the state. The interdependence highlights how crucial Canada is to Oregon's prosperity. But the links extend beyond commerce and shared values. Oregon has implemented policies concerning healthcare, climate change initiatives, and labor rights that strikingly mirror those found in Canada. This alignment in governance and social priorities suggests a deeper compatibility. Intriguingly, this closeness hasn't gone unnoticed within the state itself. There has been discourse among some Oregonians about potentially leaving the United States altogether. It's important to note this isn't solely linked to movements like the Greater Idaho Initiative, which seeks to redraw state lines with its eastern neighbor. Instead, some discussions revolve around the possibility of becoming part of Canada. If the U.S. federal government continues to enact policies that diverge significantly from Oregon's core values, especially concerning environmental stewardship and social issues, the idea of aligning with Canada might gain more traction. Don't be entirely surprised if this West Coast state begins to seriously contemplate a northward shift. The foundations for such a consideration, built on economic reliance, shared policies, and cultural similarities, are already in place. Please, make sure you watch this video until the very end, as we will be drawing some important conclusions based on all the states discussed. Now, let's consider number 5. Alaska. Picture this scenario. You reside in Alaska, often called the last frontier, geographically detached from the contiguous United States. Surrounded by vast wilderness and unique challenges, you might suddenly have a realization. Geographically, and perhaps culturally, you feel closer to Canada than to much of the U.S. mainland. Alaska's separation from the lower 48 states is a defining characteristic, and its profound connections with Canada extend far beyond simply sharing a northern border. The state's economy is deeply interwoven with Canada's. Key sectors like oil, seafood, and natural resources heavily rely on this relationship. Think about the extensive pipelines crossing borders, the shared fishing grounds crucial for Alaskan fleets, and the significant investments Canadian companies have made in Alaska's energy and resource industries. Canada plays an indispensable role in these vital economic areas. Some of Alaska's largest fishing operations depend on access to Canadian waters, and Canadian corporations hold major stakes in the development of Alaska's natural wealth. Without this robust Canadian connection, Alaska's economy would face severe difficulties, potentially jeopardizing its stability. However, the interdependence doesn't end with economics. Military and defense collaborations between Alaska and Canada are also substantial. The North American Aerospace Defense Command, or NORAD, already integrates U.S. and Canadian forces for continental security. This pre-existing framework means that in a crisis situation, Alaska and Canada might naturally collaborate closely, perhaps even before significant U.S. mainland involvement. Alaska's unique history adds another layer of complexity. Before being purchased by the United States from Russia in 1867, it was Russian territory. While it has been American soil since the purchase, its geographic isolation and deep-seated ties with Canada, both economic and cultural, could lead it to seriously reconsider its position within the Union under certain circumstances. Imagine a future where the United States faces significant political instability or a major economic downturn. Given its reliance on and proximity to Canada, Alaska might not feel the same level of obligation to Washington, D.C. as other states might. If a critical political or economic tipping point were ever reached, Alaska could very well look north and ponder whether shifting its allegiance to Canada might be a more viable or beneficial path forward. The historical context, economic realities, and established defense partnerships create a unique dynamic that makes this possibility less outlandish than it might seem for other states. Moving on to number 4, Vermont. Let's delve into the Green Mountain State. Vermont possesses a rich and distinct history centered around independence. It's a fascinating piece of trivia that before it joined the United States in 1791, Vermont existed for a period as its own independent republic. This historical precedent of self-governance perhaps subtly influences its modern character. Fast forward to the present day, and you'll observe that Vermont's progressive policies and distinct culture often make it feel somewhat different from many other parts of the U.S., arguably aligning more closely with Canadian sensibilities. Its approach to governance and social issues frequently echoes the priorities seen north of the border. What makes Vermont's case even more compelling is the existence of actual movements within the state that advocate for secession from the United States. For numerous years, an organization known as the Second Vermont Republic has actively promoted the concept of Vermont breaking away to become an independent nation once more, or potentially even exploring the option of joining Canada. This isn't just abstract speculation, it's a tangible political discourse, however niche it might be. But what factors could realistically drive Vermont down such a path? Firstly, let's examine Vermont's economy. The state maintains strong trade relationships with Canada, especially with the neighboring province of Quebec. Vermont's key industries, such as agriculture, particularly its famous maple syrup production, clean energy initiatives, and even its approach to social programs, show significant alignment with Canadian models. These economic interests are already heavily intertwined with Canada, making the idea of formally joining its northern neighbors seem like a potentially practical consideration from a purely economic standpoint. When you further consider the cultural parallels, Vermont's shared appreciation for small-town living, natural beauty, and outdoor recreation, alongside its affinity for social policies often found in Canadian provinces, the notion of a closer union feels less like a radical departure. Vermont residents are accustomed to embracing social policies that mirror Canadian approaches to healthcare, social welfare, and environmental protections. Politically, Vermont's consistently progressive stance often finds more common ground with Canada's overall political direction than with certain segments of the U.S. political spectrum. Given the current political climate in the United States, which sometimes features sharp divides on core values, it's conceivable that Vermont could increasingly look northward. With its unique history of independence as a backdrop, the idea of leaving the U.S. and forging an even closer relationship with Canada might not appear as far-fetched to Vermonters as it might to residents of other states, should circumstances push them in that direction. Let's turn our attention to number 3, Michigan. Here, the prospect of becoming Canadian might seem less about cultural affinity and more about sheer economic pragmatism. Michigan shares a bond with Canada, particularly Ontario, that is incredibly deep and goes far beyond simple geography. The economic connection between Michigan and Canada is so profound, so deeply integrated, that if these ties were ever severed, Michigan's entire economy could potentially face a catastrophic collapse. We are talking about an astonishing $80 billion worth of trade crossing the border between Michigan and Canada every single year. This staggering figure makes Michigan arguably the most economically intertwined U.S. state with Canada. The dependency is immense. A significant portion of this trade flows through the Detroit-Windsor corridor, which stands as one of the most vital and busiest trade routes in all of North America. Thousands upon thousands of trucks traverse this corridor daily, moving essential goods back and forth, highlighting the constant high-volume exchange that underpins both economies. But the truly critical factor lies in Michigan's automotive industry. This sector, historically the backbone of Michigan's economy, is heavily reliant on Canada. Supply chains are intricately linked, with many vehicles being assembled using parts manufactured in both countries. Components routinely cross the border multiple times during the manufacturing process. You simply cannot discuss Michigan's economic health without acknowledging its symbiotic relationship with Canada's manufacturing sector, especially in Ontario. The connection isn't limited to economics. It extends to shared infrastructure as well. Michigan and Canada share critical infrastructure links, including major bridges like the Ambassador Bridge, tunnels, and even integrated power grids. Interestingly, the Ambassador Bridge, the busiest border crossing between the two nations, is actually owned by a Canadian billionaire, further emphasizing the intertwined nature of their infrastructure. Furthermore, Michigan relies on Canadian electricity imports to help power the state. This infrastructural and energy dependence adds another layer to the argument that Michigan functions, in some respects, more like a Canadian province than an entirely separate U.S. state entity. Historically, Michigan even briefly considered the idea of joining Canada. Back in the 1800s, following the Toledo War, a border dispute with Ohio, there were serious discussions about Michigan potentially merging with Canada rather than remaining part of the U.S. While this path wasn't taken, the historical context reveals that the idea isn't entirely without precedent. Given this deep economic integration, infrastructural dependence, and historical footnote, if Michigan ever perceived that its fundamental economic interests were better served by aligning more closely with Canada, perhaps due to shifting U.S. trade policies or economic instability, the notion of flipping north might not be as improbable as it initially sounds. Now let's explore number 2, Minnesota. This state might catch you by surprise as a candidate for potential Canadian alignment. It's not typically the first state that comes to mind when thinking about Canadian connections, unlike perhaps states known for their border cities. Yet, upon closer examination, the links between Minnesota and Canada are substantial and multifaceted. Firstly, there's the basic geography. Minnesota shares a very long border with Canada, stretching nearly 550 miles, primarily bordering the provinces of Manitoba and Ontario. This extensive shared boundary naturally fosters cross-border interaction and connection. But the relationship extends well beyond just being neighbors. Economically, Canada is incredibly important to Minnesota. In 2023 alone, Minnesota exported goods worth over $7 billion to Canada. This makes Canada one of Minnesota's most significant economic partners. A vast array of Minnesotan industries, from agriculture and mining to manufacturing and technology, rely on this trade relationship. This economic interdependence forms a strong foundation for closer ties. Beyond business, Minnesota and Canada share numerous cultural traits. There's a common Midwestern prairie politeness and friendliness often noted by visitors. Both regions share a deep appreciation for the outdoors, with similar landscapes fostering activities like fishing, hunting, camping, and hockey. The shared experience of enduring long, harsh winters also creates a certain cultural kinship. The similarities are palpable enough that some people in Minnesota have even been mistaken for Canadians due to their accents, particularly the distinctive vowels sometimes associated with the upper Midwest and parts of Canada. Delving deeper, Minnesota's political landscape also shows considerable alignment with Canadian values on certain issues. The state has historically been more receptive to progressive policies concerning healthcare access, environmental regulations, and robust social service programs compared to many other U.S. states. These political leanings often mirror the approaches favored in Canada. Historically, Minnesota wasn't always part of the United States either. Before achieving statehood in 1858, portions of the territory were governed by the British, and its early economy, particularly the fur trade, had strong links to Canadian networks like the Hudson's Bay Company. This historical connection, though distant, still resonates. That connection persists today, with many Minnesotans having family ties in Canada or even holding dual citizenship. Some experts speculate that if the U.S. were to experience a major political or economic crisis, Minnesota, with its strong economic ties, cultural similarities, and historical links, might seriously contemplate looking north towards Canada for its future stability and alignment. Given the existing deep connections in economics, culture, and shared values, it's not entirely far-fetched to imagine scenarios where some Minnesotans might advocate for a shift closer to their northern neighbor, especially if they feel their values are better reflected there. Finally, we arrive at number 1, Washington. While you might associate Washington state primarily with tech giants like Microsoft and Amazon, or its renowned coffee culture centered in Seattle, there's a compelling case to be made for its profound connection to Canada, potentially making it the most likely candidate on our list. A potential shift towards Canada here feels less like a distant hypothetical and more like a plausible evolution based on existing realities. Washington's relationship with Canada, particularly British Columbia, goes far beyond merely sharing a border. The state is deeply integrated with its northern neighbor economically, politically, and culturally. The economic ties are immense. In 2023, trade between Washington and Canada exceeded $20 billion. This massive volume underscores Canada's role as an indispensable economic partner. Key industries in Washington, including technology, aerospace, agriculture, and timber, have extensive cross-border supply chains and collaborations. Seattle and Vancouver function almost as a single economic corridor in many respects, with significant movement of capital, talent, and goods between them. But it's not just about trade in goods. Washington also heavily relies on Canada for energy. A substantial amount of hydroelectric power flows south from British Columbia, helping to power Washington's homes and industries. This energy dependence creates a critical infrastructural link. Washington's policies and political climate also frequently align more closely with Canada than with many other parts of the U.S. On crucial issues such as healthcare policy, environmental protection initiatives, and social services, Washington's progressive stance mirrors Canadian approaches significantly more than it does the policies of more conservative U.S. states. There's a shared commitment to climate action and sustainable practices that binds the region together across the border. Furthermore, Washington has been actively exploring ways to deepen its integration with British Columbia. Proposals for a high-speed rail connection that would link Seattle and Vancouver in under 2 hours are a prime example. While ambitious, such projects demonstrate a clear intention to integrate further with Canada, not pull away. The cultural overlap between Washington and British Columbia is also undeniable. People move fluidly back and forth across the border for work, recreation, and family. Shared lifestyles emphasizing outdoor activities, a vibrant arts scene, and a generally progressive social outlook are common to both Seattle and Vancouver. Many residents of British Columbia work in Washington while maintaining their homes in Canada, creating a truly transnational community. Interestingly, some politicians in Washington have openly discussed the benefits of deeper economic integration with Canada. Considering this existing deep interdependence, economically, politically, culturally, and infrastructurally, if the United States were to face a significant crisis or a political shift that Washington residents felt fundamentally diverged from their values, The option of aligning more formally with Canada might seem like a natural, almost logical step, given that the state already functions in many ways like a southern extension of the Pacific Northwest region centered around Vancouver. The idea of Washington looking northward for its future seems closer than one might initially imagine. So, there you have it. An exploration of 6 U.S. states with surprisingly deep connections to Canada. Could Oregon, Alaska, Vermont, Michigan, Minnesota, or Washington truly break away and join their northern neighbor? As we've seen, the ties that bind these states to Canada are multifaceted, encompassing strong economic interdependencies, shared infrastructure, similar political leanings, cultural affinities, and even historical precedents or ongoing secessionist discussions. While the idea of states leaving the Union remains highly speculative and faces immense legal and political hurdles, the underlying connections are undeniable. A significant political upheaval, a severe economic crisis within the U.S., or a continuation of diverging federal policies could potentially act as tipping points, pushing these states to seriously reconsider their position. The economic lifelines, particularly for states like Michigan, Alaska, and Washington, are so critical that any major disruption could force a reevaluation of allegiances. For states like Vermont and Oregon, the alignment of progressive values and policies with Canada might become increasingly appealing if the U.S. political landscape shifts dramatically. Minnesota's blend of economic ties, cultural similarities, and historical connections provides another compelling case. Ultimately, whether any of these states would ever take such a monumental step is uncertain. National identity, historical loyalty, and the complexities of constitutional law are powerful forces. However, acknowledging the depth of these cross-border relationships is essential for understanding the regional dynamics of North America. The connections are real, and under the right, or perhaps wrong circumstances, they could theoretically pave the way for scenarios currently confined to the realm of speculation. What do you think? Could any of these states realistically consider joining Canada? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and remember to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more engaging content from our channel.